The plasma bolt sizzled past Lieutenant Alexandra Ghost Hartwell's head, close enough to singe her regulation buzz cut and fill her nostrils with the delightful aroma of ozone and impending death. She rolled behind a chunk of twisted metal that had, until approximately 30 seconds ago, been part of a very expensive colonial defense turret. "Well," she muttered, checking her rifle's power cell with the casual air of someone ordering coffee, "this is going spectacularly." The insectoid hive forces had chosen today to remind everyone why they were considered the galaxy's premier nightmare fuel. 6-foot-tall mantis-looking things with 4 arms, razor-sharp everything, and what psychologists would probably classify as severe anger management issues, were currently attempting to redecorate the landscape of Kepler 438b with coalition guts. Ghost peered around her improvised cover and assessed the tactical situation. The technical term for their current predicament was, in her professional opinion, completely sideways. The fancy alien energy weapons that their coalition allies were using made pretty light shows but seemed about as effective against chitin armor as harsh language. The Luminari forces, bless their crystalline hearts, were fighting with textbook precision and getting systematically shredded for their trouble. "Ghost, we've got movement on the eastern flank," Corporal Felix Bulldog. Anderson's voice crackled through her comm. The man had earned his nickname by being roughly as subtle as a freight train and twice as stubborn. "These bugs are really starting to tick me off." "Copy that, Bulldog. Try not to let them hurt your feelings too badly." Ghost watched a group of hive warriors advancing in perfect formation, their compound eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. Beautiful creatures, really. Shame they wanted to turn everyone into protein paste. That's when Lieutenant Keshara, of the Luminari 3rd Expeditionary Force, got her first real look at human combat doctrine in action. Ghost grabbed a chunk of debris, hefty piece of concrete with some very attractive rebar sticking out, and hurled it with enough force to make a professional baseball pitcher weep with envy. It caught the lead hive warrior's center mass, punching through its thorax with a wet crunch that would haunt lesser beings' nightmares. "Strike one," Ghost announced cheerfully, already moving. Keshara, who had been trained in the finest military academies of 3-star systems, watched in fascination as Ghost dove under a hive warrior's swinging claws, grabbed its leg, and proceeded to use it as an impromptu club against its buddy. The sound was distinctive, wet, crunchy. The kind of noise that suggested structural integrity was more of a guideline than a rule. "What are you doing?" Keshara called out, her voice carrying that particular note of confusion that usually preceded complete psychological breakdown. "Fighting," Ghost replied, currently engaged in what could charitably be called hand-to-hand combat, and more accurately described as interpretive violence. She had somehow acquired a hive warrior's severed arm and was using it to beat another warrior about the head and thorax with gleeful efficiency. The Luminari warrior, whose species had evolved on a peaceful garden world where the most dangerous predator was roughly equivalent to an angry butterfly, felt her 3 hearts skip several beats in perfect synchronization. This was not how warfare was supposed to work. There were rules, protocols, dignified ways to conduct military operations that didn't involve using enemy body parts as improvised weapons. Sergeant Holly Iron Vasquez chose that moment to demonstrate human creativity by turning a damaged fuel cell into what could generously be called an explosive device. The resulting fireball took out 5 hive warriors and painted the landscape in several new and exciting colors. "Overkill is underrated," Holly announced with the satisfaction of an artist completing a masterpiece. Ghost, meanwhile, had managed to get herself thoroughly covered in what she assumed was hive blood, but could just as easily have been alien motor oil. She was missing half her left sleeve, had a cut across her forehead that was bleeding freely, and appeared to have acquired a slight limp. None of this seemed to slow her down in the slightest. In fact, if anything, she seemed to be enjoying herself more. "You're injured," Keshara pointed out, because apparently stating the obvious was a universal constant across species. "It's just a flesh wound," Ghost replied, currently strangling a hive warrior with its own antenna. "I've had worse paper cuts." This was not, technically speaking, accurate. But Ghost had learned long ago that morale was half the battle, and the other half was making the enemy question their life choices. The hive warrior she was currently throttling certainly seemed to be having some deep thoughts about career alternatives. Keshara watched as more humans joined the fray, each one fighting with a combination of tactical brilliance and what could only be described as cheerful insanity. They used everything as weapons: rocks, chunks of metal, broken equipment, and in one memorable case, a very surprised alien plant that Felix had uprooted and was wielding like a very angry, very thorny club. "Why are you like this?" Keshara found herself asking, though she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know the answer. Ghost paused in her systematic dismantling of hive forces to consider the question. Around them, the battle was winding down with the sort of decisive victory that left historians struggling for appropriately dramatic language. Human soldiers were treating wounds that should have been fatal as minor inconveniences, laughing about injuries that would have hospitalized entire alien medical units, and using enemy corpses as impromptu seating while they shared ration bars. "Like what?" Ghost asked, innocently, applying what appeared to be duct tape to a gash on her arm that was still bleeding with enthusiastic determination. Keshara gestured helplessly at the carnage, at the humans who were treating the aftermath of mortal combat like a particularly successful office party at Ghost herself, who had somehow managed to acquire a Hive Warrior's helmet and was wearing it like a trophy. Like that! Like you're not even bothered by any of this!" Ghost tilted her head, genuinely puzzled. "Should we be?" And that, Keshara realized with growing horror, was when she understood that this conversation was going to be much, much worse than she had initially imagined. The field medical station was a testament to the Coalition's optimistic belief that warfare could be conducted in a civilized manner. Clean white surfaces, sterile equipment, and the kind of organized efficiency that suggested someone, somewhere, still believed in things like proper procedure and medical protocols. The humans had turned it into something resembling a particularly rowdy sports bar. Ghost sat on an examination table, swinging her legs like a child at a doctor's office, while a Coalition medic attempted to treat her various injuries with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for diffusing explosive devices. The medic, a gentle creature from the Healers Guild, whose species had evolved empathy as a survival trait, kept making distressed chirping noises every time Ghost moved. "Hold still," the medic pleaded in its musical voice. "This wound requires proper suturing." "It's fine," Ghost replied cheerfully, examining the hive helmet she'd claimed as a souvenir. "Just slap some medical tape on it and call it a day." Keshara watched this exchange with the growing realization that she was witnessing something fundamentally wrong with the universe. The human had taken enough damage to kill most species twice over, and she was treating it like a minor inconvenience. Worse, the other humans were doing the same thing. Felix was regaling anyone within earshot with a detailed account of how he'd used a broken piece of equipment to perform what he generously called emergency surgery on a Hive Warrior. The fact that his definition of surgery seemed to involve creative applications of blunt force trauma was apparently beside the point. So there I was, Felix continued, with the enthusiasm of someone sharing vacation photos, completely surrounded, weapon jammed, and this big ugly bug comes at me with all four arms swinging. So I grabbed this chunk of metal, right? And I thought to myself, Felix, my boy, time to get creative. Holly was nearby, casually resetting what was obviously a dislocated shoulder by slamming it against a wall. The crack was audible across the medical bay. She tested the joint with a few experimental rotations and nodded with satisfaction. "Good as new," she announced. "Anyone got some painkillers?" "Not for me, just thought they might taste." "Good." Keshara's crystalline features shifted through several colors that, in Luminari body language, roughly translated to confused existential dread. She approached Ghost with the careful steps of someone approaching a potentially dangerous animal. "Lieutenant Hartwell," she began formally, her voice carrying the kind of careful control that suggested she was working very hard not to scream. "Just Ghost is fine," the human replied, now examining her rifle with the casual air of someone performing routine maintenance rather than treating a weapon that had just been used to end approximately 15 lives in creative ways. "Ghost, then." Keshara struggled to find the right words. "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." Ghost looked up from her weapon, eyebrows raised in polite curiosity. "Shoot. Why are your people so—" She gestured helplessly at the scene around them, where humans were treating combat wounds like skinned knees and swapping war stories like fishing tales. "So aggressive? So comfortable with violence? So completely unconcerned with your own mortality?" Ghost considered this question with the kind of thoughtful expression usually reserved for philosophical debates or wine selection. Around them, the medical bay had gone quiet as other humans tuned in to hear the answer. "Aggressive?" Ghost repeated, sounding genuinely puzzled. "We're not aggressive. We're just practical." "Practical?" Keshara's voice cracked slightly. "You used enemy body parts as weapons." "Well, yeah," Felix chimed in from across the room. "Waste not, want not. Besides, they weren't using them anymore." Keshara felt one of her hearts skip a beat. "That's not normal behavior." Ghost exchanged a look with her squad mates, the kind of silent communication that came from shared experience and mutual understanding. Then she sighed, set down her rifle, and settled back on the examination table. "Keshara," she said gently, using the alien's name with careful pronunciation, "can I ask you something? What's your homeworld like?" The sudden change of topic caught the Luminari off guard. "Lumina Prime? It's beautiful. Peaceful meadows, crystal forests, gentle streams. The most dangerous creature on our world is the Shadow Wing, and they only eat fruit." "Sounds lovely," Ghost said with genuine warmth. "Probably has a nice, stable climate too, right? No sudden weather changes, no natural disasters, no seasons that can kill you if you're not prepared." "Of course not," Keshara replied, pride creeping into her voice. "Our ancestors chose Lumina Prime specifically because of its stability and safety." Ghost nodded slowly. "Right. And I'm guessing most of the Coalition species come from similar worlds? Nice, safe, predictable environments where the biggest worry is maybe running out of your favorite food?" "Well, yes. That's how civilized species choose their colonies. Safety first." The humans in the medical bay started to chuckle. Not malicious laughter, but the kind of gentle amusement that came from a shared joke that outsiders wouldn't understand. "Keshara," Ghost said, her voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher explaining basic concepts to a confused student. "Let me tell you about Earth." She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and Kashara found herself unconsciously stepping closer, despite every instinct telling her to maintain a safe distance. "Earth doesn't have a stable climate," Ghost began conversationally. "We have something called seasons, which means that every few months, the entire planet decides to try a new way to kill us. In the northern regions, temperatures drop low enough to freeze water solid. I'm talking about cold that can kill you in minutes if you're not prepared." "That sounds terrible," Kashara whispered. "Oh, that's just winter," Holly called out cheerfully. "Tell her about summer." "Right, summer," Ghost continued. "That's when parts of our planet become so hot and dry that the very air can catch fire. We call them wildfires, and they can move faster than most creatures can run, turning entire forests into infernos that burn for weeks." Kashara's crystalline skin was shifting through colors that indicated increasing distress. "Why didn't your ancestors leave?" "Leave?" Felix laughed. "We evolved there. Earth is our homeworld. And honestly, the weather is the least of our problems." "The least?" Kashara's voice had risen to what could generously be called a squeak. Ghost nodded seriously. "See, Earth has this thing about predators. Most worlds, you get maybe one or two species that might pose a threat to intelligent life. Earth has—" She paused, doing mental calculations. "Well, let's just say we stopped counting after the first few hundred." "Hundreds of predators?" "Oh, no, Ghost corrected gently. "Hundreds of different ways that predators can kill you. The actual number of predatory species is much higher." Holly had apparently decided to join the conversation because she wandered over with a medical scanner still attached to her arm. "Tell her about the ones that hunt in packs." "Right, pack hunters," Ghost continued, with the enthusiasm of someone sharing an interesting hobby. "We've got wolves, which are basically killing machines with excellent teamwork skills. Hyenas, which can crack bones with their jaws and think rotten meat is a delicacy. Wild dogs that can run for hours without stopping, wearing down their prey through sheer persistence. And that's just the mammals," Felix added helpfully. "Don't even get me started on the insects," Ghost said, with a shudder that seemed only half theatrical. "Some of them are venomous enough to kill creatures 1,000 times their size. Others hunt in swarms of millions, and some of them have figured out how to use tools." Keshara was staring at them with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or particularly gruesome accidents. "How did your species survive?" "Barely," Ghost replied with dark humor. "And only because we got really, really good at killing things before they killed us." The coalition medic, who had been quietly listening while continuing to treat Ghost's wounds, made a soft sound that might have been agreement, or possibly the alien equivalent of whimpering. "But surely," Keshara said desperately, "surely your civilization has moved beyond such primitive concerns. Surely you've created safe spaces, controlled environments." The humans exchanged another one of those looks. "Keshara," Ghost said gently, "what do human children do for fun on your typical Saturday afternoon?" I wouldn't know. Play quietly? Study? Create art? They play games like tag, which is basically practice for hunting and being hunted," Felix explained cheerfully. "Or hide and seek, which teaches camouflage and tracking skills. Or they climb trees, which is excellent training for escaping ground-based predators." "And that's when they're not playing sports," Holly added, "which are basically ritualized combat. with rules designed to prevent actual death. Usually, Ghost leaned back, watching Keshara's face cycle through increasingly alarming color combinations. See? The thing about growing up on a death world is that you learn to treat danger as normal, expected, part of the background noise of existence. Deathworld? Keshara whispered. Oh yeah, Ghost said casually. That's what the galactic databases classify Earth as. Category 12 Deathworld, actually, which I'm told is pretty impressive. Most intelligent species evolve on Category 1 or 2 worlds at most. The medical bay had gone completely silent, except for the gentle humming of alien medical equipment and what sounded suspiciously like Keshara hyperventilating. So, when you ask why we're so comfortable with violence, Ghost continued conversationally, it's because we've been dealing with mortal peril since before we could walk. This little skirmish with the hive? For us, that was basically a Tuesday. A slow Tuesday, Felix corrected. Right, a slow Tuesday. We've seen worse at family barbecues. Keshara looked around the medical bay, taking in the humans who were treating potentially fatal injuries as minor inconveniences, sharing stories of creative violence like they were discussing favorite recipes, and generally behaving as if nearly dying was just another item on their daily to-do list. This explains so much, she whispered, and yet somehow makes everything so much worse. Ghost watched the color patterns shift across Keshara's crystalline features with the kind of clinical interest usually reserved for watching fascinating chemical reactions. The luminari was cycling through what appeared to be the entire visible spectrum, which Ghost was fairly certain meant something significant in alien body language. You know what, Ghost said, sliding off the examination table with the kind of casual grace that suggested her various injuries were more of a mild inconvenience than actual medical concerns. I think you need the full picture. Guys? Felix and Holly immediately perked up with the enthusiasm of people who had just been invited to share their favorite horror stories. Other human soldiers in the medical bay began gravitating toward their little group, drawn by the promise of what was clearly going to be an educational experience. Right, Ghost said, settling into what was obviously going to be a comprehensive briefing. Let's start with the basics. Earth has 5 major threat categories that we deal with on a daily basis. She held up one finger. Biological threats. This includes everything that wants to eat us, poison us, infect us, or otherwise end our existence through creative applications of natural selection. Like spiders, Felix added helpfully. We've got spiders the size of dinner plates that can jump 12 feet and have fangs that inject neurotoxins. Or the tiny ones that are practically invisible but can kill you in 30 minutes, Holly chimed in, really keeps you on your toes. Keshara made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and static interference. Spiders? Those are real. Oh, spiders are just the beginning, Ghost continued cheerfully. We've also got snakes that can swallow prey larger than themselves whole, sharks that are basically living weapons with a brain stem, and jellyfish so venomous that touching one will make you wish for the sweet release of death. Don't forget the bears, Felix said. Tell her about bears. Right, bears. Imagine a creature that weighs as much as a small vehicle, can run faster than most humans, climb trees, swim, and has claws that can tear through metal. Now imagine that this creature occasionally wanders into human settlements looking for food and gets annoyed when people object to having their garbage cans raided. A human corporal Ghost didn't recognize had wandered over and was nodding sagely. My grandmother lived in bear country. She used to keep a shotgun by the front door and bells on the garbage cans. said the bells weren't to scare the bears away. They were to let her know when it was time to get the gun. Keshara's color patterns were now cycling so rapidly they were starting to strobe. Your grandmothers fought bears. Only when they had to, Ghost replied matter-of-factly. Most of the time we just avoid them. That's threat category 2, geological hazards. She held up a second finger. Our planet is geologically active, which means the ground occasionally decides to rearrange itself without warning. Earthquakes can level entire cities in minutes. Volcanoes can bury continents under ash and change global weather patterns. And then there are tsunamis. Tsunamis, Keshara whispered. Walls of water the size of skyscrapers that move at the speed of aircraft and can travel across entire oceans, Holly explained with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. They show up with maybe a few hours of warning if you're lucky. Sometimes less, the unnamed corporal added. I was stationed in the Pacific when the big one hit in '89. Saw a wave take out an entire coastal city in about 20 minutes. Nature's way of reminding us who's really in charge. Ghost nodded approvingly. Which brings us to threat category 3, atmospheric hazards. Our weather doesn't just change, it actively tries to murder us. She began counting on her fingers. Hurricanes that can level forests and turn everyday objects into high-velocity projectiles. Tornadoes that can pick up houses and drop them somewhere else entirely. Blizzards that can bury entire towns under snow and ice. Lightning storms that turn the sky into a battlefield. And hail, Felix added with obvious relish. Chunks of ice falling from the sky at terminal velocity. I've seen hailstones the size of baseballs punch holes through car roofs. Don't forget flash floods, Holly contributed. Perfectly clear day. Then suddenly, there's a wall of water racing down what used to be a dry creek bed, sweeping away everything in its path. Keshara was now making a continuous low keening sound that the universal translators were struggling to process. How do you function? How do you sleep at night knowing all of this exists? That's the thing, Ghost said gently. We don't think about it most of the time. It's just background noise, like I said, normal. She held up a fourth finger. Threat category 4, microscopic hazards, diseases, viruses, bacteria, parasites, fungi, things so small you can't see them without special equipment, but perfectly capable of killing you in creative and unpleasant ways. Every year, we have something called flu season, Holly explained. A virus that spreads through the air and kills thousands of people annually. And we just accept it. Take some medicine, get a shot, stay home for a few days if we catch it. It mutates, Felix added cheerfully. Every year, it's slightly different, so we have to guess what it's going to look like and make new medicine to fight it. It's like playing biological roulette. And that's just the common stuff, Ghost continued. We've got flesh-eating bacteria, brain parasites, viruses that can remain dormant for decades before suddenly deciding to kill you, and fungi that can take over your nervous system. The keening sound was getting louder. But wait, Ghost said, with the timing of a seasoned performer. There's more. Threat category 5, cosmic hazards. She held up her thumb. Solar radiation that can cause cancer, asteroid impacts that can end civilizations, gamma-ray bursts from distant stars that could sterilize our entire solar system, and the occasional magnetic pole reversal that scrambles all our navigation systems and exposes us to cosmic radiation. The sun is actively trying to give us cancer, Holly said conversationally, every day. Just by existing and doing sun things. Keshara had stopped keening, and was now staring at them with the kind of blank expression that suggested complete psychological shutdown. And you? You evolved in this environment? For millions of years, Ghost confirmed. And here's the fun part. We're not even the scariest thing on our planet. We're not? Kashara's voice was barely a whisper. Felix grinned with the kind of expression that suggested he was about to share his favorite punchline. Nope. Want to know what Earth's apex predator is? Before Kashara could answer, Ghost continued, Humans. We are the thing that everything else on our planet is afraid of. We took a world that was actively trying to kill us in every conceivable way, and we conquered it so thoroughly that most of the other predators now exist only because we allow them to. We turned wolves into pets, Holly added helpfully. Literal killing machines. And we bred them into creatures that fetch our slippers and get excited when we come home from work. We domesticated aurochs into cattle, wild boars into pigs, and convinced various plants to grow bigger and tastier for our convenience, the unnamed corporal contributed. We didn't just survive our Deathworld, we terraformed it to suit our needs. Ghost leaned forward, her voice taking on the kind of gentle tone usually reserved for delivering terrible news. And here's what really should worry you. We've been bored lately. Bored? Kashara squeaked. Earth got too easy, Felix explained with obvious regret. We solved most of the obvious ways it could kill us. Built shelters that can withstand hurricanes, developed medicine that can cure most diseases, created early warning systems for natural disasters. So we started making our own fun, Holly said. Extreme sports, horror movies, spicy food that causes actual physical pain, competitive activities where the entire point is controlled violence. Ghost nodded sagely. We actively seek out danger for entertainment. We pay money to be scared, to experience simulated mortal peril, to test ourselves against manufactured challenges because our actual environment isn't trying hard enough to kill us anymore. And then, she continued with the kind of dramatic timing that belonged in theaters, we found out there was an entire galaxy full of new and interesting ways to almost die. She gestured around the medical bay, at the aftermath of their recent combat, at the humans who were treating near-death experiences like particularly engaging hobbies. So, when you ask why we're so comfortable with violence and aggression, it's because we've spent our entire evolutionary history learning that the universe is trying to kill us, and the appropriate response is to kill it back. Harder. With style points. Kashara looked around the room at the humans, really looked at them, and for the first time began to understand what she was seeing. Not soldiers. Not even warriors. Something far more terrifying. A species that had looked into the abyss of a hostile universe and decided it wasn't trying hard enough. There's more, isn't there? She asked weakly. The humans exchanged those looks again, the ones that suggested shared knowledge and dark amusement. Oh, Ghost said, with a smile that was probably meant to be reassuring but definitely wasn't. You have no idea. A medic from the Healers Guild, who had been quietly tending to wounded coalition forces nearby, approached their group with the kind of hesitant steps that suggested professional curiosity warring with self-preservation instincts. Forgive the interruption, the medic said in their musical voice, but I couldn't help overhearing. You mentioned that human children engage in practice hunting games? Oh, that's just the tip of the iceberg, Felix said, brightening considerably. Tell them about playground equipment. Ghost's grin widened. Right. So we build these structures specifically for our children to play on. They're designed to test balance, coordination, strength, and pain tolerance. Pain tolerance? The medic's harmonious voice cracked slightly. Monkey bars, Holly explained helpfully. Metal bars suspended 8 feet off the ground that children swing across using only their grip strength. When they fall, which they frequently do, they learn valuable lessons about physics and their own limitations. Or slides, the unnamed corporal added, smooth surfaces that children climb to the top of and then launch themselves down at dangerous speeds, trusting that they'll be able to stop themselves at the bottom. And seesaws, Felix continued with obvious enthusiasm. Balanced planks, where children learn about leverage, timing, and what happens when your partner decides to jump off without warning. Kashara made a strangled noise. You deliberately build dangerous structures for your young? We call them jungle gyms, Ghost said proudly. The name itself should tell you something about our priorities. The Healers Guild medic was now taking notes with the frantic intensity of someone documenting a fascinating new form of madness. What other activities do human children engage in? Well, Ghost mused, there's swimming, which involves deliberately submerging themselves in water and trusting that they can remember how to not drown. Bicycle riding, where they balance on 2 wheels while propelling themselves at speeds that can cause serious injury if they crash. Tree climbing, Holly added, because apparently the natural human response to seeing a tall, potentially unstable structure is to scale it, using nothing but grip strength and questionable decision-making skills. And sports, Felix said with obvious relish. Oh, the sports. We have children run into each other at high speeds while chasing balls. We teach them to hit small objects with sticks as hard as possible. We encourage them to kick inflated spheres with enough force to break bones if they miss and hit a person instead. Don't forget martial arts, the corporal contributed. We literally teach children how to fight more effectively. The philosophy being, Ghost explained to Kashara's increasingly horrified expression, that if you're going to get into a fight anyway, you might as well know what you're doing. But surely, the medic interjected desperately, surely you protect them from serious harm. Supervision? Safety equipment? The humans exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey both amusement and pity. We try, Ghost said gently, but there's this thing we say. Kids will be kids. It means we accept that children are basically small, inexperienced humans with poor impulse control and a natural tendency toward activities that could maim or kill them. It's how they learn, Holly explained. Trial and error. Mostly error, but they survive most of it. Most of it? Kashara's voice had climbed several octaves. Well, yeah, Felix said matter-of-factly. Some don't make it to adulthood. It's tragic, but it's also natural selection in action. The ones who survive to reproduce tend to be the ones with better survival instincts. Or better luck, the corporal added pragmatically. Sometimes it's just luck. The medic was now furiously scribbling notes while making soft, distressed sounds. And the adults? The adults just accept this? We have insurance, Ghost replied, as if this explained everything. And emergency rooms. And a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Though some things that don't kill you also make you wish they had, Holly added thoughtfully, like wisdom tooth extraction. Oh, don't get them started on medical procedures, Felix warned with a grin. Too late. Ghost's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who had found a new avenue for psychological torture. Right. So human bodies are basically designed by committee, which means lots of parts don't work properly and need to be fixed or removed. We grow extra teeth that serve no purpose and cause pain, Holly explained to Kashara's increasingly glassy-eyed stare. So we have them surgically removed, while we're awake, with local anesthetic that doesn't always work completely. And childbirth, the corporal said with dark humor. Human females give birth to offspring with heads that are barely small enough to fit through the birth canal. It's excruciating, dangerous, and can take hours or even days. But they do it anyway, Ghost said proudly. Often multiple times. Because humans want children badly enough to risk death bringing them into the world. And then, Felix added, with obvious delight at Kishara's expression, they raise those children in the same Deathworld that nearly killed them, knowing that the kids will face all the same dangers, and more. It builds character, Ghost said solemnly. The medic looked up from their notes with the expression of someone who had glimpsed the fundamental chaos underlying the universe. How is your species not extinct? Stubbornness, Ghost replied immediately. And spite. Mostly spite. We're too angry to die, Holly agreed cheerfully. It's become a point of pride. Kishara slowly sank into the nearest chair, which happened to be designed for species with different anatomical requirements, but seemed sturdy enough to support someone having an existential crisis. I think, she said in a small, broken voice, I'm beginning to understand why the rest of the galaxy finds humans so unsettling. Ghost watched Kishara process this information with the kind of clinical fascination usually reserved for observing particularly interesting chemical reactions. The Luminari had gone through what appeared to be the entire spectrum of existential dread, and was now settling into a sort of crystalline, thousand-yard stare. But you know what the really funny thing is? Ghost said, her voice taking on the conversational tone of someone about to deliver a punchline that would haunt nightmares for generations. Kishara made a sound that might have been, what? Or possibly just the death rattle of her worldview. We've been going easy on you. The medical bay went completely silent. Even the ambient humming of alien medical equipment seemed to pause in respectful acknowledgement of the cosmic joke that was about to unfold. Easy, Kishara whispered. Oh yeah, Felix said, settling back with the satisfaction of someone who had been waiting for this moment. See, when we joined the galactic community, your people gave us these lovely little pamphlets about civilized warfare, rules of engagement, Geneva Convention equivalent stuff. Proportional response protocols, Holly added helpfully, minimize civilian casualties, preserve cultural sites, fight fair. Ghost nodded seriously. We've been trying very hard to be good galactic citizens, fighting your way instead of our way. It's been educational. She pulled out a small device that looked suspiciously like a datapad and began scrolling through files with the casual air of someone browsing vacation photos. But since you seem so curious about human nature, maybe it's time for a little historical context. Computer, display file designation, Earth military history, greatest hits. A holographic display flickered to life above the datapad, and Kishara found herself staring at what appeared to be archival footage from Earth's past. The first image showed humans in primitive armor, carrying weapons that looked laughably crude by galactic standards. This is from about 3,000 years ago, Ghost explained conversationally. Early human warfare. Notice how they're fighting in organized formations, using tactics, coordination, very civilized. The footage shifted, showing larger battles, more sophisticated weapons, more organized destruction. This is from about 2,000 years ago. Humans had started to get really creative with the whole killing each other thing. Siege engines, psychological warfare, the beginnings of what we like to call strategic thinking. More images flashed by, each one showing increasingly sophisticated methods of organized violence. Keshara watched in growing horror as human warfare evolved from simple combat to something resembling a dark art form. 1,000 years ago, Ghost continued, her voice maintaining that same cheerful educational tone. Humans had figured out chemistry, explosives, firearms, the ability to kill at a distance with precision and efficiency. The footage was now showing battles that made the Hive conflict look like a children's playground dispute. Massive explosions, weapons that could level buildings, tactics that seemed designed less for victory and more for the complete psychological destruction of the enemy. 500 years ago, we started getting really good at the industrial application of warfare. Mass production of weapons, global conflicts involving entire continents, casualty numbers that... Ghost paused, glancing at Keshara's increasingly pale crystalline features. Well, let's just say they were significant. The holographic display shifted again, and now Keshara was looking at footage that made her previous understanding of violence seem quaint by comparison. Weapons that could destroy cities in seconds. Conflicts that raged across entire planets. Humans fighting humans with a creativity and dedication that bordered on the artistic. 200 years ago, Ghost said, her voice dropping to a more somber tone, we developed the ability to split atoms, nuclear weapons, the power to turn entire continents into radioactive wasteland. The footage showed mushroom clouds rising over devastated landscapes, and Keshara realized she was looking at weapons that could sterilize planets. We used them, Felix added matter-of-factly, twice, just to see what would happen. And then we built thousands more, Holly continued, enough to destroy our entire world several times over. We called it mutually assured destruction. The idea being that if everyone could kill everyone else, maybe nobody would be stupid enough to actually try. Did it work? The Healers Guild medic asked, in a voice that suggested they weren't sure they wanted to know the answer. Mostly, Ghost replied, though there were a few close calls where we nearly ended our own species by accident. Miscommunications, technical malfunctions, that sort of thing. She advanced the display again, and now the footage was showing more recent conflicts. Humans fighting with weapons that looked almost alien in their sophistication, tactics that seemed to blend technology and psychology into something approaching pure nightmare fuel. 50 years ago, we started developing what we call precision warfare. The ability to kill exactly who we want to kill, when we want to kill them, from anywhere on the planet, with minimal collateral damage. And information warfare, the unnamed corporal added. Psychological operations, the ability to destroy enemies without ever firing a shot, just by convincing them that resistance is futile. Ghost nodded approvingly. We got very, very good at breaking things, including each other. She closed the display and looked directly at Keshara, who was now making a continuous low keening sound that the universal translators had given up trying to process. But here's the thing that should really keep you awake at night, Ghost said gently. Everything I just showed you, all of that creativity, all of that innovation, all of that perfectly refined talent for organized destruction? She paused for dramatic effect. That was humans fighting other humans, the most dangerous, most adaptable, most successful predators our planet ever produced. We spent thousands of years in an evolutionary arms race with ourselves, constantly developing new and better ways to kill the smartest, most dangerous opponents we could find. Each other, Keshara whispered. Each other, Ghost confirmed. And we got so good at it that we nearly drove ourselves extinct multiple times. The only reason we survived was that we kept deciding, usually at the last possible moment, that maybe we should try cooperation instead of competition. Felix leaned forward with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a favorite anecdote. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about something called the Cold War. 40-plus years where the two most powerful human nations pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to end civilization, and just waited, seeing who would blink first. Nobody blinked, Holly added. They just kept building more weapons until someone finally said, "This is stupid," and started talking instead of shooting. And that, Ghost said, settling back with the satisfaction of someone delivering the ultimate punchline, is why we're so comfortable with violence. It's not that we're naturally aggressive. It's that we spent our entire evolutionary history learning how to kill the most dangerous thing in the universe. Which is? Keshara asked weakly, though she clearly already knew the answer. Other humans, Ghost replied cheerfully. Everything else is easy by comparison. The medical bay was now completely silent, except for the soft humming of equipment, and what sounded suspiciously like several different species having quiet nervous breakdowns. So, when you see us fighting the hive, Ghost continued conversationally, what you're actually seeing is a species that learned warfare by practicing on themselves, now applying those skills to opponents who evolved in a nice, safe, predictable environment where the biggest threat was maybe a fruit-eating bird. We're not even trying that hard, Felix added helpfully. This is us being polite. Following your rules, Holly agreed. Fighting fair, using appropriate levels of force, being civilized. Ghost stood up, stretching with the casual air of someone who had just finished an interesting conversation rather than delivered what amounted to a cosmic horror story. But if you ever really want to see humans at our best, she said with a smile that was definitely not reassuring, just wait until someone threatens something we actually care about. Then you'll see what millions of years of evolutionary warfare optimization actually looks like when we stop playing by other people's rules. She picked up her rifle, checked the power cell, and headed toward the exit with the easy stride of someone who had just provided a helpful educational briefing. Oh, and Keshara, Ghost called back over her shoulder. Welcome to the team. Try not to think too hard about what that actually means. Keshara sat in stunned silence, processing the realization that she had just learned why humans were so feared across the galaxy. Not because they were naturally violent or aggressive, but because they were the ultimate survivors of a cosmic-level experiment in evolutionary warfare. And somehow, impossibly, she found herself looking forward to their next mission together, even if she'd never sleep properly again. 3 days later, Keshara found herself back on the front lines, fighting alongside the same humans who had fundamentally altered her understanding of the universe. The Hive had launched another assault, and once again, she watched Ghost and her squad turn a desperate battle into what could generously be called controlled chaos. This time, however, Keshara noticed things she'd missed before. The way Ghost casually deflected a Hive warrior's strike, while simultaneously calculating angles for a ricochet shot that would take out 3 enemies behind cover. How Felix used a broken piece of equipment not just as a weapon, but as part of an improvised tactical solution that turned the enemy's superior numbers into a disadvantage. The almost supernatural way Holly seemed to anticipate danger and react before threats fully materialized. These weren't soldiers adapting to combat. These were apex predators operating in their natural element, and everything else was just scenery. When the fighting ended and they were sharing rations in the aftermath, Ghost caught Keshara staring and raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Still thinking about our little chat?" Ghost asked, with that same casual tone she used for discussing weather or ammunition counts. "Every night," Kishara admitted. "I keep wondering what it says about me that I find you all strangely reassuring to have around." Ghost's grin was sharp enough to cut steel. "It says you're learning, rookie. Welcome to the food chain." Songs created a soundtrack that no military strategist in the galaxy had ever planned for. And somewhere in the vastness of space, Annie Garrett was already explaining to her new computer friends about this really cool thing called the Internet, that they were definitely going to love. Burn in the cold light of distant stars. Around her, the combined fleets of the galactic community maintained perfect formation, not because they'd been forced to submit, but because they'd learned to respect the species that had saved them all. She still wore Thexakai's bones, though now they served more as a reminder than a warning. The galaxy had new apex predators, and they wore the uniforms of the species everyone had once called primitive primates. The dress code, incidentally, had been permanently revised about the strength found in diversity. They were hope made manifest in fur and fang and unshakable conviction. He'd left cubs in human care. They'd returned leading a legion of hope, all going to fight whether we want to or not. The really bad news is, our enemy doesn't believe in surrender, negotiation, or leaving survivors. Ambassador Kroon's gill slits were fluttering so rapidly they were generating small atmospheric disturbances. And the good news? Kat's smile widened, and for the first time since this whole diplomatic nightmare began, it looked genuinely warm instead of terrifying. "The good news, Ambassador, is that they're about to learn why you should never underestimate a species that considers asymmetric warfare and impossible odds to be recreational activities." She gathered her materials and headed toward the exit. "Briefing starts in 1 hour. Conference Room Alpha. Bring coffee. It's going to be a long war." The chamber remained silent until the massive doors sealed behind her, and then every delegate began talking at once. Outside, walking toward what was definitely not going to be her last difficult conversation of the day, Commander Kat Wolf allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Humans were officially part of the galactic community now. Time to show the universe what that really meant.